What is going on, Peacemakers, and welcome back to another video. So today's video, we are jumping into the episode 2 of What is Sin, finally getting into the meat and potatoes of the whole segment, which is why sins are so specifically and inherently bad for us. First of all, I just want to mention, you're going to notice some patterns throughout this segment, mainly giving a reasonable explanation as to why sins are so inherently bad for us. But I apologize if it seems redundant. However, there is truth in the matter. So be mindful of that when we go through, through these conversations of talking about these specific sins and why they're inherently difficult. So pride is one of those that we're jumping into for our first sin of discussion. So our first victim is pride. And first of all, let me just tell you something. I view pride as kind of like this jacket that we put on. This jacket deflects anything from being able to come in. And I think that is ultimately one of the most difficult challenges that we deal with is our own pride. Back when I was working for the fire department, there was this where inside this office where we got our time stamps down for. There was this poster of a firefighter drowning in the ocean. He's just being dragged through the ocean, and surrounding him was these sharks, and one of them was labeled financial debt, relationship issues or problems, anxiety, depression. And as he's just drowning in this, there's something tied to his foot. And it's a cinder block, but on that cinder block is the label pride. Pride is ultimately our own undoing. Pride, ego, it's all contributing to self-destruction in more ways than may be obvious to us, but it leads to our ultimate destruction and demise in ways that we may not realize. And hopefully this video and this these next videos exposing these sins will help reveal this to us. So I digress. Let's jump into it. What is pride, right? I think if it's best to understand something when we take a look at its definition or when we take a look at what it is, right? If we take a look at this whole broad stroke or broad perspective of what something is, we don't really get down to the specifics as to why or what makes this so bad. Pride is a feeling of deep pleasure and satisfaction derived from one's own achievements, the achievements of those with whom one is closely associated, or from qualities and possessions that are widely admired. Okay, and here's a cool thing, or not a cool thing, but here's a weird thing about pride, is that not all the time is it from ourselves. It's not always something that is provoked or promoted solely from us or because of us. Most of the time, it comes from someone putting value into it. If, for instance, you're walking down the road and somebody just takes a second look at you and is like, dude, that's a really good shirt that you got on there, you're going to feel a sense of pride. You're going to feel a sense of like shock and awe. Be like, dude, thanks for noticing. Thanks for saying something. Like, man, that sounds really nice. And then, up here it sounds really good. But what you're not realizing is that there's a ultimate sub meaning or sub attraction occurring, and you're going to start wearing that shirt more often. Or you're going to wear shirts like it, and you're going to go out in hopes of getting more affirmation or more acceptance, and also comments of people giving value to the possessions that you have, therefore associating that with you. Rather, you associate that by, they're not just talking about the shirt, they're talking about how it looks good on you. Or rather, you associate that with you have really good taste in clothes that you wear, therefore giving you a sense of pride that I really know good taste in clothes, or I really know whatever. It's like, no, you just got lucky and you picked a shirt that somebody liked, you know? So anyways, pride in one way has a very shock and awe feeling of like, wow, it's an ego boost, right? That felt really good. That was really nice to hear. And then, the left hand comes out of nowhere, and all of a sudden it encaptivates you in this subplot of, all right, now we got to get that again, right? And we start looking for it, and we start finding ways in which we could try to promote that or instigate that from happening again, right? So then, the second thing that you'll notice about most sins is that one thing sin does more than anything is introduce pleasure to oneself. It really does stem from just me, myself, and I. How can I get pleasure? How can I, what can I do to receive pleasure from somebody, you know? And perhaps one of the worst ways this, brings out the evil in us is by, sexual desire outside of marriage. And I say outside of marriage because when you're committed to someone or one person, these things really tend to die off, and it's not really just this physical attraction. It really becomes the embodiment of one, right? So that's why it's really crucial and important to be married or get married with somebody that God has truly ordained you for. So I digress. And not only just is it very selfish in its nature or if it's an original intent, it is also without God, giving us a physical pleasure as it separates us from our spiritual pleasure. Now, what is spiritual pleasure, right? What the heck is that? I would say spiritual pleasure is being one with the Spirit, being one with the Holy Spirit, and being as close to getting your spirit as close to alignment with the Holy Spirit is probably the ultimate, just for lack of a better term, pleasure or accomplishment we could ever succeed in our lives. And that's the goal. That's the goal, is to try to get rid of as much physical, dead weight as possible, and load up as much as spiritual pleasure and spiritual abundance and characteristics as possible. I would say another thing to kind of help with this line of thinking is kind of like an anti-seven deadly sins, is the fruit of the Spirit. Joy, peace, patience, gentleness, self-control. I can't remember all of them, but there's a lot of them that really, if you follow that standard, could probably end up being as close to perfect as possible, humanly possible, since we fell from, grace. What we covered in the last video. So God is perfect and without sin. Therefore, God does not commit sin, and God is anti-sin. Okay, so understanding that means that God doesn't associate himself with sin. And if we choose to associate ourselves with sin, we are inherently separating ourselves from God, from the Holy Spirit. And if we're doing that, if we're actively going against what the Spirit is, and then actively going after worldly pleasures, physical pleasures, just because it gives us that chemical high in the now, we find ourselves sacrificing the present for the future in a very horrendous way that isn't so obvious at first, but shows its ugly head the more we attract to these things, such as physical pleasure, such as alcohol, drugs, just any and every stimulus that you could think of that you are capable of producing yourself outside of characteristics that would line up more with the fruit of the Spirit. So spiritual pleasures can only be accomplished by God because he is perfect and only contains characteristics of good. Now here's where something gets really interesting, because we can take this a kind of both ways, but pride is also the consciousness of one's own dignity, and also kind of gives us affirmation and identity. Who are we? And this is why it's so important that we must be careful of the decisions of, we must be careful of the delusion of grandeur our consciousness may be identifying us by. This delusion of grandeur that we are something that we are not, but we like to think we are because it makes me feel good about myself. It makes me feel better about myself. It helps me sleep at night. And I think this level of consciousness that we are that really speaks affirmation into our identity is really what you see with this pride movement. Now, here's the thing, man. I don't care who you're attracted by. I don't care what you're attracted by. But the problem becomes when you enact on those things in which you know you shouldn't. It's not because you're gay that makes me upset or frustrated. In fact, I don't really care. It's your life. You live it the way you want. But there's a part of me that wants to show you the better version of yourself. That's the part of me that my first love is bringing somebody to Christ. That's the part of me that wants nothing more than to spend eternity with you, because I think you're something worth value. Now, don't get prideful about that, but know that God does find value in you. But when you separate yourself from him because you are attracted to these other sinful natures, God can't follow you there, because God is sinless. God cannot commit sin, or else he's a hypocrite, for one, and two, it's kind of defeats the whole purpose of who God is this righteous, all-knowing, and all-being God. He can't contradict himself, or else he wouldn't be who he says he is. He would be hypocritical. So my problem then becomes what you associate your identity with. If you associate yourself with pride, and then you associate yourself with pride of your sexual orientation, which is the most immature version of ourselves, what you're doing is you're putting yourself at a lower standard. You're putting yourself at a lower, you're putting yourself down lower and basing your identity, soul identity, and soul purpose on something that is so immature, and something that is just plain and simple a very small, minute portion of life. I mean, I should say it's an important one, but it's a small part of it, right? Procreating is what it's there for, right? Go and multiply is what God told us. God told us he wanted us to go and multiply. And one of the only ways, by the way, which we can do that is if man lays with a woman, but in God's eyes, because it's so much better this way and it's so much sweeter for us in this way, because it separates confusion from the marriage, is if we are married, if we are ordained by God, if we choose to have God be number one in our lives. Then, and only then, can we really associate ourselves with something that is worth associating with. I think it's pretty stupid to associate ourselves with something that is so small, so minute. And by the way, if it's for the attraction of the same sex, it doesn't procreate, therefore it doesn't have any value or meaning, because it doesn't do anything for us. It's also going against nature, right? It's just not, it's not natural necessarily. So therefore, what is the true intent behind same-sex or acting in the mannerisms of same-sex? I can't really see any other intent behind it besides to betray or to go against God. Now, here's the thing. Here's something that I may be able to bridge the gap with, and something that all of us can really relate with and understand. If I choose to live my life as though I want to just go out and have, sexual relations with just anybody and everybody, that is just as much of a sin as it is to lay with someone who is of the same sex as you. In terms of go and multiply, it's kind of a smack in the face to God, and I really do think that it is inherently evil or driven by Satan to indulge in this activity, because one, it doesn't help with anything. It doesn't. You don't multiply, right? You can't conceive. Despite this rhetoric that you're hearing, man cannot produce children. That is the gift that God has given women. Now, men play a very important role in that, in planting the seed, and then being able for women to go out and conceive children. But it has to be done in these specific terms, because it adds confusion to the relationship if you allow multiple spouses. But not just that, multiple spouses, then multiple different partners of all types of all types, right? It adds even more confusion when you add in family, when you add in not so much ethnicity as much as it is the moral structure, right, of the implications of family, the implications of not really knowing the boundaries in which it is okay and it's not okay. Okay, so I just wanted to stay on that topic for a split second. And you'll find this in Leviticus as well, where the word confusion comes into play is when it talks about thou shalt not lay with your uncle's wife, for you will reveal his nakedness and also add confusion. For those, I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship where you're not the only one. I'm not speaking to this as though I have been. I'm speaking to this as though I was afraid that I wasn't the only one in the relation. I was the third one in the relationship. When you suspect that there is someone cheating on you, when you suspect that someone, that your significant other is not just with you, there's a level of confusion. There's a level of jealousy. There's a level of confusion that comes into the scenario, into the situation, that is not biblical and is not godly. God is not the author or creator of confusion. And that is why it's so crucial and important that we remain faithful and loving to our significant other, to our spouse. All right. So we must be careful of how we deal with the delusion of grandeur our consciousness may be identifying us by. Again, what we just discussed, getting into thinking that I am better than I am God. Just what Genesis chapter 3 tells us, the serpent tries to persuade Eve into believing, is that she could become like God, knowing good and evil if you bite this tree or this fruit of knowledge. And then pride seeps in there and gets its consciousness of its own dignity in there. It's important to consciously classify who we want to be, and therefore give us the ability to prosper through God's moral characteristics, such as the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. And I think that's the most crucial part of all of this that we should really take from this, is pride and understanding why it's so bad for us, and understanding the negative implications that it can do. And what it really does is it alters our brain. It alters our mind and our brain in a way in which we perceive the world through false lenses. We start looking at ourselves like some of these people or some of these youngsters are doing out there, when they start dressing up like animals and they start acting like animals and they start choosing to identify by animals and all this stuff. And where it really all stems from is a lack of identity in Christ, our Creator. And Satan's doing a really good job of twisting the narrative, twisting the objective of where that sense of pride and identity comes from. And we enact on our sinful nature and indulge ourselves by getting involved in the furry stuff, which, man, I don't really have to go into detail as to why that's just a bad situation there. The idea of sexualizing an animal is just very... I don't really feel like I have to go into great detail as to why that just isn't a good thing. God gave us originally dominion over this land. And we still have it. We still have dominion over it. We still have, hierarchy and superiority over it. However, it's been lessened because we decided to fall. Heaven is no longer on earth with us because we decided to go against God's commandment for us in our lives. We can add that, we can turn that into a personal message, or we can also let that just be what it is. The historical fall of humanity's grace from God. But pride really does drive the narrative, and it gives us a false sense of identification as to who we are. We think we're so good. We think we are the bee's knees, man. We think we are so awesome. It gives us that ego boost that we're all searching for, some affirmation and man, if you chase that, if you follow that and let that become your identity, you will be very shallow. Very shallow. You won't be somebody who everybody wants to be around. You'll be somebody who says, man, that reminds me of a time when I did this, and this. And sometimes we start lying, and sometimes we start over-exaggerating to help feel relatable to somebody else, and therefore we start creating an alter ego that really is furthest from who we are. And we start becoming fake. And we start counterfeiting who God made us to be. And we do it all in the name of trying to do it secular and separate from God. And pride is very difficult to deal with. I mean, you'll know, at least if you understand the properties and if you understand the implications of pride, you'll know real quick what you're dealing with when you're dealing with a prideful individual. You'll know real quick. I always know real quick if someone is just so full of themselves. One, you'll notice because they talk about themselves more. They'll try to relate their stories, their life experiences more to the scenario. It's really just all an attention grab, right? And that's what they're looking for. That then therefore feeds in to that pride, to that self-identification, that self-affirmation, that self-value. And it affirms that, and it just makes everybody it imitates, and it makes everybody look as though they are praising and worshiping you. And that's what we want. We want to be gods. We want people to praise us. We want people to feed into our pride. We want that. Because we've got this horrible thing known as an ego. We got this horrible thing known as pride that loves worship. Either to be worshipped or to worship. Now let me tell you something. To worship means that you are being humble enough to put something else above yourself. So if there was ever an anti-pride, it would be humbleness. And we obviously know that, but the important implication there is to know why humbleness is a better way to be than prideful. Because I'm putting God above myself and everything else around me, instead of putting everything else around me above God. So there you have it, pride, and why it's so ugly, why it's so nasty. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate from my comments on pride, but man, on the pride movement and stuff, but man, it couldn't be further from the truth. When you decide to resonate yourself or identify yourself or use your identification surrounding the most immature part of you, surely you have to know you're in the wrong. Surely you have to know that that's not good. I digress. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you guys stay tuned for the next ones that are shortly to come, because we're going to jump into a lot of them. We're going to jump into a lot of explanation or understanding of sin and why it's so bad for us. One final thing that I forgot to mention that I really should put at the end of all my notes is that another reason why it is so bad, not just from the physical point of view, but also from the spiritual point of view, is because if it is true, like the verse that I read to you guys in the first video, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 44, every being has a physical and spiritual being. It is so important and crucial to exercise and feed into the spiritual more than the physical, because the physical will attract to the things in which are secular from God or separating from God, and the spiritual will attract to those that are godly. Very crucial, very important. That's going to be very redundant as we go throughout the rest of the videos. It's not only the key important part of that, but it's a important part of that. And hopefully I've demonstrated how it tears us and separates us in those certain instances in our lives. Hopefully I've demonstrated that enough to the degree in which we all kind of understand its implications and why it's bad, right? Not just the physical, but also the spiritual. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys take care. Have a fantastic day. I'll see you in the next one.